Hey guys, it's Kay again. Today I'm going to try to elaborate on the full process for a background painting I did for Bjorn episode 3, specifically the end credits. If you guys missed it, please go watch it. It's a super funny sequence. I also just wanted to say thank you so much for all the nice comments I got on my last video, as well as all the feedback that you guys gave me. In this video, I'll try to address the things you guys wanted to see. I remember some comments saying they wanted to know what software I was using, what brushes and techniques, so I'll really try to go into that as much as I can. So I hope you guys like that. This particular background was the first shot of the end credits scene for Bjorn episode 3, where Chad is desperately calling his phone from London to see if Becca has it. I ended up even doing some fun animation of Chad doing a little nervous dance for one of the shots. I originally did it for fun, but it ended up being used in the final cut, so it was really fun to see it when it came out. This background was definitely my favorite to do for this episode. Maybe because it was like in a new location with lots of room for detail and architecture, and I could kind of go all out. Now, the first thing a background artist does is look over the storyboard for the shot. We see the general layout of the location, as well as how the characters interact with them. Though sometimes for smaller studios such as ours, the animator or art director may call for a change in angle in the original storyboard layout in favor of a better composition or layout. For the first shot, they told me they wanted to be able to see River Thames, the Big Ben, and then have a nice camera zoom in on a phone box where Chad was. So immediately, I began researching the area and the basic London architecture. Once I felt like I had done enough research and I got a good layout of where everything was and the basic architecture and shapes, I started with thumbnail sketches, paying attention to the major shapes and composition. Thumbnail sketches are by no means meant to be pretty. It's mostly just me trying to figure out where I want the shapes to be and, figuring out the composition in general. So I think it's very important for the thumbnail phase that they don't look pretty, because that's not the focus. I've even been told by professionals to use really ugly brushes for thumbnailing and rough sketching. It really helps you focus on what's important, just laying down the foundation instead of trying to get into the detail and making it look pretty. I had a couple of options down for the first shot, and I found myself liking this one the best. It is then that I started on a tight rough. Obviously, most layouts would require tight, clean liner, but since I am both the layout artist and the painter, it honestly would be a waste of time for them to be cleaned up perfectly, so I'm focusing on keeping it rough, but clear enough to work with. The main challenge of taking a real-life location and putting it into an animated show is figuring out how to stylize and simplify it in a way that fits the show itself. Now, finals were coming up, and I had some other freelance jobs on the side, so with the time I had, I studied the basic architecture of the buildings in the area and simplified it accordingly. I'll say this now, I have a special tiny bit of personal hatred for French architecture, or rather Gothic architecture. Don't get me wrong, this is complete personal bias. I think it's way too overcomplicated, detailed, and repetitive, making it way too hard to read. I mean, look at this. What am I supposed to look at? Regardless, I did my best, and by the end, I was thoroughly enjoying myself. Simplifying the Big Ben, as well as the Palace of the Westminster next to it, was definitely the most difficult task of the painting. But after that, it was the bridge. I must admit, I may harp on French architecture, but this Westminster Bridge is a beautiful structure, especially with these intricate lampposts and railings. Once everything was sketched out and decided, I went about gathering lighting references and painted a rough color thumbnail to help me establish the general colors and lighting. Though this may seem very obvious, a lot of people forget the correct lighting in favor of appeal, myself included. At the end of episode 3, I knew Becca most likely went to bed around 8 or 9. London, having an 8-hour difference, let me know that in my background we needed to have a 5 or 6 a.m. lighting. I was especially excited about this because I knew Big Ben, the bridge, and the London Eye would be lit up, which in my opinion would look much prettier with the colors. When I felt like I had a good grip on what colors I wanted, I could finally get started with the process of painting, my favorite part. This is just personal preference, but I prefer doing the backdrop first and then working my way forward. But with how I wanted this piece to be layered, I quickly painted the sky to set the overall tone, and then quickly blocked out the shape of everything in the painting to make sure it fit in the composition. Now, regarding the comments of my last video, you guys were so nice, by the way. I saw some people asking what software I was using and my brushes and techniques, so I'll try to get a little bit into that in this video. I've mostly been using ProCreate in the iPad because of convenience. I have a full-time job and a full-time class schedule, which has been requiring me to move all over the place, so I've never really had the time to sit down at a Cintiq and paint. The ProCreate on the iPad has really helped make it convenient so I can paint on the go. Though, now that my schedule is a lot looser and I have some more free time, I can finally get a Cintiq and start painting in Photoshop again. I must admit, the program is a lot more powerful in its capabilities of how to layer and organize your files. So, I've been trying to stick with Photoshop as much as I can. One of the most important aspects of painting a background is knowing how to layer and organize your files so that it seamlessly can be given to the compositor to use as they wish. It's like giving them a bunch of different puzzle pieces to play with, depending on how they want the shot. Now, I still am a very young artist, so I have a lot to learn. But now that I have been finally learning from other people in the field, I feel like I have a much better grasp at layers and how to organize them. As I started painting, I knew that I needed to have the bridge, the river, the midground, the buildings, and the background all on their own layers. In addition, I created the layers of the clouds, birds, cars, and boats so that the compositor could move them around as they wish to get the illusion of an early morning bustling city. Now, a lot of what I know is self-taught, so I'd say I try to use as few brushes as possible and stick to some pretty simple techniques. Thankfully, working hard and paying attention, as well as reaching out to other artists, has taught me a lot of fun things, especially when Pencilish went to Lightbox. I forced my way into working into the booth because the panels were way too full, but I genuinely enjoyed meeting every single one of you guys that came. Everyone was so incredibly nice and cheerful and excited, and it really pumped me up to get better. To take advantage of showing up early, I went around with my work to other people working in the booths and asked if they could essentially roast me to figure out what I needed to work on most. I got some really amazing advice from some really amazing artists, including Ben Tong, Paulo Rivera, and Margot Bucci. To sum it up, the biggest notes I got from these people was that my artwork needed better atmospheric perspective, better values, and higher contrast. So for this particular piece, I tried focusing on those the most. Now, I'm constantly using an adjustment layer to make sure my values are completely readable and pushing them for higher contrast. I made sure to give the bridge plenty of grime and grip using several texture overlay layers. For those who don't know, texture overlay layers are a common technique used in painting, where on a separate layer, a texture is painted over to look like the texture desired. A photo of a texture can be used as well. The layer is then set to multiply, or whatever suits your fancy. Lowering the opacity makes it more subtle. Then I simply merge to the layer below. This can be done with several different types of texture layers as well for more detail. It is helpful for applying scratches, wear and tear, or rocky textures. Pretty much anything depending on how you use it. For the buildings, I simply painted the windows on another layer, and then painted the details of the buildings themselves. Big Ben and the Palace specifically had a lot of windows, so this took a hot minute. But once everything was in place, it was pretty easy to paint out the details. Once I get deep into painting, I always make sure to have my color thumbnail on the side. This makes sure that I'm staying accurate to the color and lighting that I want. My favorite part to paint was definitely the underlighting of the Big Ben, which really made the clock and the bridge pop. For the trees, I simply used a round brush to sculpt out the lighting, and then went in with foliage brush to imply the leaves texture. It's a simple but effective technique. Last of all, I got to painting the boats, looking up references of boats on river themes and putting my own design spin on them. I made sure that they looked well used with grime and scratches, and that the colors fit the painting overall. The cars were a very last-minute addition. I quickly pulled up some reference of cars in the area and painted them out, giving two options for the compositor to move them around. And here's how the piece turned out. As every artist says, there's always a lot of mistakes that only you see, and things you wish you could have fixed when you went back. But art isn't always necessarily about the product for us. It's about the journey and what we learned along the way, as corny as that sounds. It was definitely my favorite piece. I was very proud of it by the time I was done, and I learned a lot from creating it. I hope I can implement the skills I've learned for future pieces. Thank you so much for listening. If you guys have any specific questions or feedback on what you want to see specifically from me in the future, please feel free to comment down below. Thanks again for watching. Until next time.
If you like what you just saw, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, Pencilish Studios.